There is a moment, one single quiet moment, that can shatter everything you thought you knew about the people who were supposed to love you most. For me, that moment didn't happen on a battlefield. It didn't happen in some foreign country far from home, beneath a sky the color of smoke. It didn't happen in any of the places I had braced myself for heartbreak over the years. The forward operating bases, the field hospitals, the bare cement rooms where decisions with serious consequences are made in whispers. It happened in my childhood bedroom. The one with the faded track ribbons on the corkboard and the poster of a soccer team I used to love. The room that still smelled faintly of the lavender my mother had kept in the dresser drawer for as long as I could remember. The room where I had grown up, dreaming of the person I would one day become. It happened 3 days before my brother's wedding, when my mother sat down on the edge of my old bed, folded her hands in her lap the way she does when she has something difficult to say, and spoke the words I had never, not in my most unguarded imagination, expected to hear from her. "Sarah, we think it would be better if you didn't wear your uniform to the wedding." I remember how still the room became after that. The kind of still that isn't peaceful at all. The kind that presses down on your chest like something enormous that has no name and no shape. Something that simply sits on you until you deal with it. I looked at her, my mother, the woman who had sent me care packages every single month I was deployed, boxes of instant coffee and crossword, puzzle books, and the kind of socks with extra cushion in the heel that she knew I preferred. The woman who had taped a photograph of me in my dress uniform to her refrigerator and told every neighbor, every friend from church, every cashier at the grocery store in a 20-mile radius that her daughter served. The woman who had stood in the bleachers at my commissioning ceremony, in the wind and the cold, and cried so openly and so freely that the woman beside her had offered a tissue, and my mother had accepted it and dabbed her eyes and then laughed at herself for crying. She had called it the proudest day of her life. Those were her exact words. The proudest day of my life, and now she was sitting in my childhood bedroom asking me to tuck that proudest day away somewhere out of sight so that a wedding would photograph nicely. "Mom," I said slowly, measuring every word the way you learn to measure things when precision matters, "what are you saying?" She didn't meet my eyes. She smoothed the fabric of her skirt, the pale blue one she wore to events she wanted to feel composed for. Marcus and Vanessa have put together something very refined, very elegant. You know how Vanessa's family is? I knew exactly how Vanessa's family was, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Because you deserve to understand who I was before that bedroom. Before that conversation, before the day that cracked something open in me and eventually, after much more than I expected to endure, let the light back through. My name is Sarah. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, the kind of place where the seasons are distinct and meaningful, where the summers are heavy and golden and the winters are cold enough to remind you that the world has edges. The kind of place where your family history is part of the public record, where people know not just your name, but the names of your grandparents and the church your family attends, and whether your people have always been here or arrived from somewhere else within living memory. We had always been here. My grandmother on my father's side was born 2 towns over, her mother before her. The roots went down far enough that the soil held us. Even when we traveled far, my father served in the army, 2 decades, multiple deployments, the kind of career that shapes a man entirely and whose shape you can see in everything he does long after the uniform comes off for the last time. He cooked breakfast at exactly the same time every morning. He made decisions calmly and stated them clearly. He never raised his voice to make a point, and he never backed down from one he believed in. He was one of the most quietly formidable people I have ever known. And I have known some formidable people, His father, my grandfather, who died when I was 11 and who I still think about whenever I need to remember what dignified steadiness looks like, had served in Vietnam. Came back changed the way men did, but never bitter. I gave something, he told me once, when I was old enough to understand part of what he meant, and I would give it again. Military service was in our blood like something older than policy or politics. Not because anyone forced it on us. Not because we didn't see its costs. My father had seen its costs up close and had made his peace with them in a way that took years. But because we understood in a bone-deep way that doesn't translate easily into words, that there are things worth showing up for, worth sacrificing for, worth the full honest truth of your most difficult self, we believed in service. We believed in the showing up. I was the second of 3 children. My older brother Marcus was the golden one, the kind of person who seems to move through rooms differently than other people, who makes everyone he talks to feel like the most important person present. He was brilliant and easy and funny in the specific way that men are funny when they're also genuinely kind. And from childhood, I had watched him collect loyalty the way other people collect objects. People wanted to be near Marcus. It was simply true. My younger sister Lily was the sweet one, soft-spoken and gentle, and the kind of person who remembers what you mentioned in passing 6 months ago and asks you about it. She was the glue in quiet ways, the one who noticed when someone at the table was being left out of the conversation, who sent cards on obscure anniversaries, who cried at commercials and never apologized for it. And I was the determined one, the stubborn one, the one who climbed trees higher than any adult told her she should and ran track with a sprained ankle, and once, at age 14, talked her way into an advanced chemistry class that she had not been recommended for, and then earned the highest grade in the section by the end of the semester. Asterisk, I did not do things halfway. I never knew how. I signed up for ROTC in high school, which raised some eyebrows in our small town. Not many girls did it in those years, at least not in that part of North Carolina. Some people thought it was unusual. Some thought it was admirable. Some thought, privately, that it was a phase that would pass once I found something more comfortable to be taught. It was not a phase. I enlisted at 19. By 23, I had deployed twice, once to the Middle East, and once to a place I still cannot identify specifically, for reasons that are legal rather than personal. By 26, I held the rank of captain, had been awarded the Army Commendation Medal, and had led a unit of people who, to this day, I would trust with anything that mattered to me. I had seen things that aged me in ways no birthday could. I had sat with people in the worst moments of their lives, and I had carried loss, the way soldiers carry it, not on the surface, not dramatically, but somewhere underneath everything, permanent and present. I had also found something in those years that I had been reaching for my whole life without knowing exactly what it was, a sense of absolute purpose. The clarifying, quieting knowledge that what you are doing matters and you are exactly where you are supposed to be. My uniform was not a costume. It was not a political statement or a symbol of ideology or anything that the long and ongoing national debate about military service sometimes makes it. To me, it was the most honest thing I owned. It was every early morning when I had chosen discipline over comfort. Every moment I had run towards something hard instead of away from it. Every year I had given, and every sacrifice I had made, and every person I had served beside, and the weight of all of it, sewn into fabric, pressed and polished and worn with full knowledge of what it cost. It was my grandfather's voice telling me he would give it again. It was my father's tears at my commissioning. It was every version of myself I had ever worked to become, distilled into green and gold. My mother knew that. She had always known that until Vanessa changed the picture. Marcus met Vanessa at a graduate school fundraiser in Charlotte about 4 years before the wedding. He called me that same night, unusual for him because Marcus texted as a rule, always brief and always lowercase, always with the particular shorthand of people who were slightly too busy to punctuate. A phone call from Marcus meant something significant. The excitement in his voice was something I had not heard since we were children on Christmas morning. That breathless, disbelieving joy of someone who has discovered something they didn't dare to hope for. She's incredible, Sarah. She's everything. I was happy for him. I want to be clear about that because everything that came later might make it easy to assume otherwise. I was genuinely, completely, unreservedly happy. Marcus deserved love. He had spent his entire 20s working harder than anyone I knew, finishing a graduate degree, building a career, being the person that everyone counted on, and I had watched him do it from a distance. Through deployment after deployment and spotty satellite calls and care, packages that went one direction and worry that traveled both ways. I had always hoped someone wonderful would find him. Someone real. The first time I met Vanessa was at Thanksgiving, 3 months into their relationship. She arrived with Marcus at my parents' house carrying wine and a homemade tart, a real one, from scratch, with a lattice top that must have taken hours, and the first impression was entirely favorable. She was beautiful in the way that seems effortless but is actually the result of sustained attention and care. Perfect posture, a smile that landed on you like it was specifically for you. The particular grace of someone who has been taught since childhood how to move through social occasions without leaving anything sharp behind. She was warm with my parents, patient with our family's particular brand of loud, overlapping dinner table conversation, genuine in her affection for Marcus in ways that you cannot fake in the small moments, the way she touched his arm, the way she listened when he spoke, the small private look she gave him across the table when someone told a story he'd clearly already shared with her, with me. She was polite, precisely, carefully, correctly polite. The degree of politeness that never tips into warmth. She asked me one question about the military all evening. Do you travel a lot? And when I started to answer, she caught someone's eye across the room with a look that was too subtle to be called dismissal, but that functioned exactly like one. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that not everyone knew what to say to a veteran, that it wasn't personal. But then came Christmas, where Vanessa gently steered the conversation away from my father's military stories with a smooth and practiced redirect that he didn't notice, but that I did. And then Marcus's birthday dinner, where she mentioned twice that she found uniforms a bit intimidating and smiled beautifully while saying it, as though it were a charming quirk rather than a statement. And then a 4th of July barbecue where someone made a joke about military people being rigid, and Vanessa laughed, a laugh that was social and brief and said nothing. And Marcus, sitting right beside her, said nothing in response. Not one word, that last thing I turned over in my mind for days. Marcus, who I had watched stand up for people all his life, choosing silence because the person beside him had laughed, but I filed it away. Little things, all little things, the kind that are easy to explain individually and that only take a shape when you look at all of them together. When Marcus proposed to Vanessa, a rooftop in Savannah, a ring that caught the light and photographed so beautifully that I heard about it from 4 different family members before I heard from Marcus himself. I called him immediately and I screamed with happiness down the phone line, and I meant every note of it. I was invited to be a bridesmaid. I was honored. I was genuinely excited to stand beside my brother on one of the most important days of his life, but something changed over the months of planning. The wedding grew bigger and more elaborate and more Vanessa, which was her right completely. But there were email threads I was sometimes not included in, guest list revisions that removed people I had assumed would be there, Long discussions about centerpiece choices and vendor contracts and a photography timeline that had been planned down to the minute. And in all of it, I began to feel something I had felt before in certain rooms and certain meetings and certain situations where I was, functionally, the wrong kind of person for the picture being assembled. I began to feel like something that needed to be managed at the bridesmaid dress fitting. Vanessa mentioned casually, with her best smile, that she thought it would be interesting if I wore something more feminine to the rehearsal dinner. I was in jeans and a blazer at the time, not in uniform, not in anything remotely military. Just my ordinary civilian self. I smiled and said nothing. Marcus was 3 feet away with a look on his face that I recognized from childhood. The look of someone trying very hard to stand between two things he loves without being crushed. I loved my brother. I swallowed it. I came home to North Carolina 5 days before the wedding, carrying a week's worth of leave and a genuine determination to be the sister Marcus needed in those last, complicated, beautiful, hectic days before he changed his life. The house was fully alive with wedding energy. My mother had put fresh flowers in every room. The dining room table had disappeared entirely under the weight of seating charts and vendor invoices and a color-coded binder that I saw her consult no fewer than 11 times in the first 2 days. The calendar on the refrigerator was covered in colored ink, with arrows between dates and small stars marking important deadlines. My father hugged me at the door. Long, tight, the particular hug of a father who has sent a child to difficult places and always breathes slightly easier when they come back. "You look strong," he said. "I am strong," I said. And we both laughed, and it was completely real. Those first 2 days were genuinely wonderful. Cousins and aunts arrived in waves. Old family friends came to help with preparations and stayed to eat and stayed longer to talk. There was food everywhere. My mother's cooking layered with Lily's baking, layered with casseroles that appeared on the doorstep from neighbors who had known me since before I could read. There were toasts and stories and late nights at the kitchen table that felt like what family is supposed to feel like at its best. Loud and warm and complicated, and real. Marcus glowed. I hadn't seen him that relaxed, that genuinely at ease in his own skin in years. Whatever was complicated about Vanessa and the world she came from and the careful image they were building together, she made my brother light up from the inside. And that mattered. That mattered more than anything else. On the 3rd day, my mother came to find me in my bedroom. I was hanging up my dress uniform, the Class A, pressed to the edge of perfection. Brass buttons polished, metals aligned exactly right. Shoes with the kind of shine that takes patience and effort and a specific kind of cloth. I had spent time on it that morning with the particular care you bring to things that represent more than themselves. I had always planned to wear it. It had never occurred to me not to. Wearing your dress uniform to a formal family occasion was not a statement in our family. It was a tradition. It was how my father had attended his sister's wedding 30 years ago. It was what we did, the same way we said grace at meals and arrived at church, before the service started and called our grandmother on Sunday evenings. It was simply part of who we were. My mother watched me smooth the jacket on its hanger. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed. And then she said it, "Sarah, we think it would be better if you didn't wear your uniform to the wedding." The silence that followed lasted a long time, or perhaps only a few seconds. I've learned that time moves differently in moments that matter. Whose idea was this? I asked. My voice was steady. That is the thing about training. It gives you a body that holds steady even when everything inside it is tilting. She hesitated. That hesitation was its own answer. Marcus and Vanessa just want everything to feel cohesive. The wedding party is wearing blush and ivory. The photos will have a certain aesthetic, and they thought my uniform would ruin the aesthetic. They thought it might draw attention away from what, Mom? My voice was still quiet, still controlled. From my brother getting married? I'm not planning to stand at the altar. I'm a guest. I'm family. She looked at her hands. You know how Vanessa's family is, Sarah? They're very particular, very image conscious. And Marcus doesn't want any conflict before the day. So there's already been a conversation, I said, about me, about whether I should be allowed to wear what I've earned. It's not like that. Did Dad agree to this? Silence. Mom, did Dad agree to this? Your father doesn't want conflict, she said very carefully. He loves Marcus. He wants the day to go smoothly. I sat down on the bed. My legs had gone uncertain in a way I didn't like. I looked at the uniform hanging in the closet, the one I had polished that very morning, the one that carried 11 years of my life, and I felt something I can only describe as a quiet devastation. Not rage, not yet. Just the particular hollow ache of being erased by people who were supposed to see you. I need to think, I said. My mother nodded and left, pulling the door shut softly. She thought my words meant I would agree. I could hear the relief in the click of the latch, and I sat alone in my childhood bedroom and I cried the way I have learned to cry, quietly, efficiently, without performance. I cried for the girl in this room who had dreamed of serving and been so proud when she was chosen. I cried for every night I had gone to sleep in difficult places thinking of home and believing that home was somewhere I could always return to completely, all of myself intact. I cried for the version of my brother I thought I knew, the one who would never send our mother to deliver this message, who would have come to me himself. When the tears were done, I lay back and stared at the ceiling, which had a small water stain in the corner that had been there since I was 12 and which I had memorized without meaning to. I listened to the house around me, my mother's footsteps in the kitchen, the television in the living room, Lily's voice somewhere asking someone something. I thought about what my commanding officer had told me once, in a moment I had never forgotten. She said, "You can shrink yourself to fit other people's comfort, or you can take up the space you've earned, but you only get to choose one." I lay there for a long time, and then I made my decision. What I didn't know yet was that 12 strangers in a church were already, without knowing it, making one too. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant downtown that I had driven past 100 times, growing up but had never been inside. Dark wood, candlelight, the hushed murmur of people performing their best selves in a room that rewarded it. The kind of place where the water glasses are thick and the menu doesn't list prices, and the staff disappear between. Appearances like stage magicians. I wore the navy blue dress I had bought 2 months earlier in anticipation of exactly this possibility, that someone would ask me not to wear the uniform and that I would, in a moment of cowardice or kindness or some mixture of both, comply. I had bought it as insurance, a backup self, something to slip into if the real me was deemed too much. Standing in front of my childhood mirror that evening, I put on the dress and looked at the woman in it and felt deeply and unmistakably like a ghost of myself, like a translation that had lost something essential in the process. But I went because I loved Marcus and the rehearsal dinner was for him, and I was not willing to make his happiness secondary to my discomfort. Vanessa greeted me at the door of the restaurant with a warm, practiced smile I had come to recognize as her social armor. "Sarah, you look so pretty." The word pretty arrived with the particular weight of a word someone has been hoping to say. Pretty, manageable, safe, the version of me she had wanted all along. "You look beautiful." "Vanessa," I said, and I meant it. She did. Love was doing something generous for her face. Marcus hugged me and whispered, "Thank you," in my ear. He meant the dress. He meant the choice. He meant thank you for making this easier. I hugged him back and said nothing and stored the complicated feeling of it somewhere I could examine later. The dinner was a success in all the visible ways. The speeches hit the right emotional notes. Vanessa's father was elegant and warm in equal measure. Marcus's best man, his college roommate Daniel, a sweet and chronically earnest man who had known Marcus through years of becoming, told a story that was genuinely funny and made Marcus look down at the table in that particular way of a person deeply embarrassed by joy. My father gave a toast. He talked about Marcus as a boy and the man he had become, and his voice went soft at the edges, the way it always does when he's moved and trying not to show it fully. He said Marcus had always known how to love the right things. He said Vanessa was clearly one of the right things. The room responded warmly. He did not mention the military. He did not mention me at any length. I told myself again that this was Marcus's evening and not mine. I was very busy telling myself things that evening. Later in the night, I excused myself to the restroom. The restaurant was laid out in a long shape, and the bathrooms were down a dim corridor that turned a corner near the host stand. On my way back, I heard voices from a small alcove, intimate, low, clearly not meant to carry. I recognized them before I processed who they belonged to. Vanessa and her mother. She actually agreed. Vanessa's mother was saying. The relief in her voice was as clear as anything I had heard all evening. She came in the navy dress, Vanessa said. I told you they would listen. A small, satisfied sound from Vanessa's mother. I was genuinely worried. I thought she was going to insist. Marcus handled it. Still, I can't imagine. At a wedding. With the photographs. A soft laugh from Vanessa. Not unkind, that was what I noticed most. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was the laugh of someone so comfortable with a conclusion that the discussion of it has become casual, settled, done. I just think it's so heavy, Vanessa's mother continued. All that military energy. It's wonderful that she serves, of course, everyone respects that. But there's a time and a place, and a wedding is. I know, Vanessa said. I didn't want to be the one to ask her directly. I was glad Marcus could handle it. A brief, warm pause between them. She looks very nice tonight, Vanessa's mother said. Very normal. Very normal. I stood in that corridor 2 steps from the corner and let those 2 words move through me. Very normal. As though who I actually was, the rank I had earned, the deployments I had survived, the years of my life given to something larger than myself, was a kind of abnormality that needed correcting. Something irregular that had been successfully managed back into a shape that the photographs would not have to account for. Very normal. I did not turn the corner. I stood exactly where I was in the dim light of that restaurant corridor, and I breathed the way I have been trained to breathe when the world is asking more of me than I expected. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. I did it twice, 3 times. Then I walked back to the table. I sat down. I picked up my water glass. I took a long, slow sip across the table. Marcus caught my eye and smiled the smile that I have loved my entire life, open and warm and entirely his. I smiled back, because I did love him. I did, completely, even in that moment when I was holding something cold and heavy in my chest that had his name partly written on it. The evening continued. The dessert arrived. More toasts were made. People drifted into smaller conversations, and the noise of it all washed around me pleasantly enough. I sat in the middle of it and felt, for the first time in a long time, the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who love a version of you that is slightly smaller than the real one. I did not sleep that night. I have spent nights in conditions far worse than a comfortable childhood bedroom. I have slept on the ground, in vehicles, in places where the sounds of the world were not safe sounds. I know what it is to be awake when you don't want to be for reasons that are legitimately dangerous. The sleeplessness was different. It was the sleeplessness of someone sitting with a question they haven't answered yet. I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling and listened to the house settle and thought about every version of the next day I could imagine. I thought about putting on the dress again, walking into that church as the carefully managed version of myself that made other people comfortable. Standing beside my brother in blush and navy while 12 years of my life hung in a closet upstairs. Untouched dot, I thought about how it would feel in the photographs. Looking at those images in 20 years. My brother's face, joyful, completely himself, and mine, present, smiling, entirely unrecognizable. I thought about Vanessa's mother saying very normal with that particular warmth of satisfaction. I thought about Marcus saying thank you into my ear at the restaurant, relieved that I had made myself easier to accommodate. I thought about my grandfather, who gave something and said he would give it again, who came home from a war that had broken many men and built a life and sat at dinner tables for decades being exactly, completely, unapologetically himself, who never once, to my knowledge, made himself smaller because someone found his truth inconvenient. I thought about the women and men I had served beside, people who had sacrificed things I cannot list here, people who had earned every inch of what they wore and who wore it without explanation or apology because it did not require either. I thought about my commanding officer's words, the ones that had come back to me again and again over the years, arriving precisely when I needed them. You can shrink yourself to fit other people's comfort, or you can take up the space you've earned, but you'll only get to choose one. Around 2 a.m, I got up. I sat at the small desk by the window. Outside, the street was quiet and the night was warm, and a mockingbird was going through its repertoire in the oak tree across the road, cycling through every song it had ever learned, one after another, relentless and entirely itself. The mockingbird does not have one song. It has all of them. It carries everything it has ever heard, and it offers all of it without apology. And it does this in the dark when no one is listening, simply because that is what it is. I sat there for a long time when the sky outside my window began to go from black to the particular dark blue that comes just before dawn. I made a decision, not out of defiance, not out of stubbornness, not out of any desire to disrupt my brother's wedding or prove a point to Vanessa or her mother or anyone else. I made it because I had finally understood that the choice to hide yourself is never as safe as it feels, that it costs you something real and lasting, that the people who ask you to be smaller than you don't always know what they're asking, but that doesn't make the cost of agreeing any less. I went back to bed for 2 hours. And in the morning, I put on my uniform, standing in front of the mirror in my dress uniform on the morning of my brother's wedding. I felt what I can only describe as returning to myself, like stepping back into a body that actually fit. My metals were aligned. My brass was bright. My posture was the posture of someone who has spent years learning that how you carry yourself as a form of communication, that it says things before you open your mouth and continues saying them after you're gone. I carried myself down the stairs. My father was in the kitchen when I appeared in the doorway. He was standing at the counter with a cup of coffee, looking at nothing in particular, the way he sometimes does in the early morning, some private thought occupying him. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. Something crossed his face. 1 second, just one, before everything settled back to careful neutral. But in that second, I saw it. Raw, immediate, unperformed. Pride. The deep, instinctive kind that doesn't ask permission. The kind you feel before you decide whether feeling it is convenient. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at his coffee cup. "Sarah," he said. "Dad," I said. We looked at each other across the kitchen, and a lifetime of things moved between us without being spoken. He was a man who had chosen peace in a situation that made peace the difficult choice, not the easy one. He understood the cost of what he'd done. I could see it. Your brass needs polishing, he said. He set down his coffee. He opened the kitchen drawer, the same drawer it had always been in, for as long as I could remember, and he took out the small tin of brass polish and the cloth he had kept there for 20 years. And he polished my buttons right there in the kitchen, the way he had done when I was 9 years old, playing soldier in his old garrison cap. His hands were careful and deliberate, and he did not say a single word while he did it. Neither did I. Neither of us needed. My mother came into the kitchen 20 minutes later and stopped completely when she saw me. The expression on her face moved through surprise and worry, and something that might have been relief, and something that might have been deep underneath everything else, a kind of pride she wasn't ready to admit yet. Sarah, you said you would think about it. I thought about it, I said. And I meant it. I had thought about almost nothing else for 3 days. This is who I am, Mom. I'm not hiding it at my brother's wedding. She looked at my father. He looked at the window. Marcus is going to, she started. Marcus is getting married today, I said. And I am going to stand in that church and celebrate him with everything I have. Nothing about this uniform changes how much I love him or how happy I am for him. She pressed her lips together. Something in her expression shifted. You look beautiful, she said very quietly. I wasn't sure if she meant it or was finding the best available piece with an irreversible situation. Either way, she said it, and it mattered. Let's go, I said. We're going to be late. The wedding was at the old church on the main street, the one Marcus and I had grown up attending, where we had been christened in the same font, confirmed in the same season, and where we had sat in the third pew from the left for what felt like every Sunday of my childhood. I had half expected Vanessa to choose a rented venue, something modern and neutral, a blank canvas for whatever image she wanted to build. The church had been a surprise and one I was glad of. Some things are better in the places that mean something. The parking lot was filling when we arrived. The morning was clear and warm, and the sky was the particular blue of early June, without a cloud in any direction. On any other morning, it would have been simply beautiful. On this morning, it felt like a kind of permission. People noticed me immediately. On our side of the gathering, I saw smiles first, real ones, the kind that start in the eyes. Old family friends who had known me since before the uniform existed. An aunt who had raised her kids alone through her husband's deployments and who reached out and squeezed my hand as I passed, without saying a word, which communicated more than most words could. My father's oldest friend, who had served with him years ago, and who straightened slightly when he saw me and gave me a nod that I understood. On Vanessa's side, I felt a different quality of attention. The particular social awareness of people deciding how to respond to something unexpected. Not hostility. Never anything as honest as that. Just the assessment. The recalibration. Vanessa's mother saw me from across the garden path. Her expression settled back into its social mask with impressive speed, but I had seen the moment before it did. She looked away, leaned toward the woman beside her. The woman glanced at me briefly, then also away. I stood straight. I breathed. I smiled at my Aunt Marcus found me a few minutes later, coming around the side of the church with the particular bright-eyed focus of a man who has one job today and is determined to do it magnificently. He saw me from 20 feet away. His steps slowed. He walked over to me and stood close and looked at me, at the uniform, at the medals, at the brass my father had polished that morning, and his face moved through something complicated that I watched carefully because I love him and I needed to know where we were. The joy didn't leave his face. But something else moved through it too. Something that looked like the resolution of a conflict he hadn't known he'd been having. Sarah, he said. Marcus, I said, a long pause. Then I asked Mom to talk to you. I know. Vanessa, Marcus. I said his name once, firmly and gently, the way you say the name of someone you love when you need them to stop for just a second. I love you. I'm so happy for you today. I am here to celebrate you. That is all that is happening. He looked at me for a long time. I could see the calculation in him, the Marcus calculation, the one he had been doing since childhood, weighing everything against everything else. And then I saw him let it go. I saw something release in him that had been clenched for months. You look incredible, he said. And then quieter, you always do, Nat. I pulled him into a hug then, long and hard, the way you hug someone when you want them to know that love is still there, even when things are complicated. He hugged me back the same way. Go get married, I told him. He went, asterisk, asterisk, the church filled slowly and beautifully. There is a specific kind of warmth that gathers in a place when people who love the same person come together for a common purpose. It is palpable in a way that almost has a texture, like good fabric. That warmth was in the church. Even with all the complexity I was carrying into the day, I could feel it and I was grateful for it. The flowers on the ends of the pews were white roses and pale greenery, simple and perfect. The light came through the stained glass windows at the angle of late morning and landed in colored pools on the wooden floor. The organ played something I recognized from childhood, a hymn that my grandmother had hummed in the kitchen, a piece of music that lived in a different part of me than most things. I sat with my parents in the front pew. My mother held my father's hand. Lily sat on my other side, already emotional. She had cried at the rehearsal dinner and showed no signs of improvement. I loved her for it. Her willingness to feel everything openly is something I have always quietly admired. I was aware of eyes on me throughout the church. Not constantly. The room had much else to offer, but with the particular peripheral awareness of someone who has spent years in environments where being observed is part of the territory. I noticed the looks, and I noted their quality. Warmth, mostly, from people who understood what the uniform meant. Curiosity from people who didn't, but without hostility. And from a few specific directions, from Vanessa's side, from places I did not let my eyes stay, something more careful. Something being decided. Vanessa's mother was 3 pews behind us on the opposite side. I did not look at her. I looked at the flowers on the altar and I breathed in. I thought about being present for my brother's wedding. Then the music changed and the doors opened. And everything I was thinking about became secondary. The flower girls went first. 2 little girls I didn't know. Vanessa's nieces, who took their jobs with the profound seriousness of people who have been rehearsed within an inch of their lives, and then, at the crucial moment, decided to improvise. They scattered petals with such enthusiasm that the congregation laughed, and the laughter was real and warm and broke something open in the room. Even the most formally composed of Vanessa's extended family laughed. I loved those little girls in that moment. The bridesmaids came next, each lovely, each placing their steps with the care of the rehearsed, each looking carefully straight ahead. I felt a small pang when they passed. They were wearing the blush and ivory Vanessa had curated, and they were beautiful in it, and I had been meant to be among them. I let the pang pass. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then the music shifted again to something larger, something that made the air in the church feel different, heavier with significance. And everyone rose, and Vanessa came down the aisle on her father's arm. Asterisk, she was genuinely, completely, breathtakingly beautiful. The dress was exactly right for her, something clean and flowing that moved the way she moved. And the light found her the way light sometimes finds certain people who know how to receive it. I heard the room respond to her in the soft collective inhale of people seeing something unexpectedly perfect. And then I looked at Marcus Dot. He was standing at the altar. And when he saw her, he went absolutely still. Not rigid, still. The way a compass needle goes still when it finds what it was seeking. His hands came together in front of him and his chest expanded slightly and his eyes filled with something. I recognized from his face at his best moments his whole life, the complete, unguarded openness of a person who has let someone in entirely and doesn't regret a single inch of it. Whatever was complicated between his world and mine dissolved completely in that moment. My brother was in love, really and truly and fully in love, and that was the only thing that mattered in that church. I cried, quietly with my chin lifted and my eyes forward, and Lily noticed and leaned her shoulder against mine, and I was grateful. The ceremony was everything it should have been. The pastor, a man who had known Marcus since his confirmation, spoke about commitment and courage and the particular bravery of choosing another person completely. Marcus said his vows steadily, with his eyes on Vanessa's face the entire time. Vanessa said hers with a poise that held until the word home where it slipped, just briefly into something raw and real. I saw Marcus reach forward and take her hands more firmly when that happened. And I knew in the way you know things that are true rather than constructed, that she meant it. Whatever her flaws, whatever her limitations, she meant it. They were married. It was real and it was right, and the church rang with the particular joy of people witnessing something they believe in. Marcus kissed his wife. The congregation applauded. The pastor said the words that release a ceremony into the world, and the organ swelled into something triumphant. And Marcus and Vanessa turned to face us as the people they now were, together. Chosen, beginning. The recession began. They walked back up the aisle, arm in arm, luminous with it. The guests rose on either side to let them pass, turning and applauding. And there was so much warmth in that church in that moment that it felt like something physical, like weather dot, and then as the couple made their way up the aisle and the applause continued and the organ played, and the afternoon light fell through the stained glass in those pools of color, something happened that I was not prepared for. I don't know who saw me first. I have never found out. I only know what I heard and what I felt and what I will carry in me as long as I live. From somewhere in the congregation toward the back, on Vanessa's side of the church, there was a sound. The particular sound of effort and dignity, old knees bearing old weight, the deliberate unhurrying of a body that knows what it is doing and has decided to do it. Regardless of the cost, someone was standing. I turned the way you turn towards something you don't yet understand, but your body already recognizes. An elderly man, 80, perhaps 85, in a dark suit that had been chosen and pressed with care. White hair, a face with the particular weathered quality of someone who has seen decades of difficult things and arrived. On the other side of them, with his dignity intact. He was standing slowly, carefully, with a cane in one hand. He was looking at me, Dot, and as I watched, as the whole church seemed to slow around this single motion, he raised his right hand. Held it at his brow, Dot, he saluted. I did not understand for one full second what I was seeing. Then from 2 rows behind him, another man stood. Older still, white-haired and fine-boned, and moving with the careful deliberateness of a person for whom standing has become an act of will. He saluted another, 3 rows to the left. A woman this time, 60-something, erect even in the effort of rising, with a small pin on the lapel of her blazer that I recognized and would have recognized. Anywhere another, and another. 1, 3, 5, 7, scattered through the congregation, on both sides of the aisle, in no order, with no signal, with no arrangement, People rising the way stars appear in a darkening sky, one at a time, and then another. And then suddenly you realize you are looking at something vast at 8, 10, 12 veterans. Standing in that sunlit church, saluting me, I have been in situations that required everything I had. I have held myself together under conditions that would break people I respected greatly. I am not someone who falls apart. I have spent years learning, training my body and my mind and my emotional responses to hold, to endure, to stay upright and functioning when the pressure is highest. I came apart completely, not loudly, not dramatically, not in any way that I planned or performed. Simply and fully, I came undone. Tears ran down my face with no warning and no apology and no possibility of stopping. And my body moved without my telling it to. I came to attention. Shoulders back, chin up, weight centered, spine straight. The posture of a person being honored. I returned every salute. One by one, I met their eyes. Each of those 12 people who had decided, in the middle of their friend's granddaughter's wedding, on a Tuesday morning in June, in a church in North Carolina, to stand up, to say without words, we know what you are. We know what you carry. We see you. We honor you. We are not going to let this moment pass without acknowledging what it means. The church had gone completely still. The recession had paused. The organ had not. The organ played on, oblivious and beautiful, but everything else in the room had stopped. I was aware, without looking, of 200 people watching this moment unfold and not making a sound. Then from somewhere, I still don't know from whom, I still haven't been able to trace it, the applause began. Slowly at first. One pair of hands, and then more, and then full, like rain that starts with single drops and arrives all at once. On both sides of the aisle. On Vanessa's side and on ours. The carefully composed guests and the warmly informal ones. Everyone, together, even from somewhere behind me and to my right, the sound of Vanessa's mother's hands coming together. That specific sound, I knew it was her. I can't explain how. I simply knew, moved through me like something important. The 12 veterans sat back down, one by one, with the same quiet dignity with which they had risen. Not hurrying, not performing, simply completing the thing they had decided to do. The recession resumed. The organ swelled. The church returned to itself, and I stood at the end of my brother's wedding pew, in my dress uniform, with tears still on my face, and I let the moment settle into me like something permanent. I found Robert during the cocktail hour, or rather, he found me making his way across the terrace with his cane, patient and unhurried, with the particular purposefulness of a man who knows exactly where he is going and why not he was 83 years old and had served 2 tours in Vietnam, beginning when he was 19. His name was Robert Gallagher, and he was the grandfather of one of Vanessa's college friends, which is how he came to be in that church, which is how everything that followed came to be. He took my hand in both of his. A gesture that older veterans have that younger ones haven't quite learned yet. The particular warmth of both hands rather than one. And he looked at me with eyes that were entirely alert and said, without preamble, I saw what they almost did to you. I'm glad you didn't let them. I did not ask how he knew. Some things move through rooms without being spoken, especially in small towns. Especially among people who pay attention. Thank you for standing, I said. All of you. He shook his head slightly, the way people do when they want to indicate that thanks isn't the right word. We didn't do it for you, he said gently. We did it because it was the right thing. Those are different. I understood that. More than he knew, I understood that the other veterans found me throughout the afternoon, at the bar, near the buffet on the edge of the dance floor. Each one carried their service in a slightly different way. Catherine, the Gulf War nurse with the pin on her blazer. A young man named Devon, barely 30, who had done 3 tours in Afghanistan and come back and built something entirely new of himself and was now, improbably and wonderfully, a high school history teacher. An older woman named Margaret, who had served in the Navy in the 80s and who told me, with great precision and a dry humor I recognized, that she had nearly stood up at a different family occasion 15 years ago for a reason she didn't elaborate on and had regretted not doing so ever. Since today I made up for it, she said Dot, we were strangers who knew each other. That is the only way I can describe what it is to meet someone who has served when you have served. There is a shared vocabulary that lives below language, a common knowledge of what things cost. You do not need to explain yourself to each other in the way that sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes you need to explain yourself to people who haven't been in those places. You are understood before you open your mouth. And the relief of that is something I cannot fully communicate to someone who has not experienced its absence. I spent the afternoon moving between my family and those 12 people, and it was the best afternoon I had had in years. Vanessa found me near the end of the cocktail hour. Before the reception dinner began, I had wondered if she would. I half expected to let the day pass into a polite, maintained silence, the kind that families sometimes achieve when the things that need to be said are too large for a wedding day. It would have been understandable. It might even have been kind in its way. She walked toward me with a directness I hadn't seen from her before. Still in her wedding dress, still beautiful, but without the usual careful armor of poise. There was something younger and less certain in her face, and I found it more appealing than anything I had seen from her in 4 years. "Sarah," she said, "can I have a minute?" We stepped out together onto a small terrace off the cocktail area. The afternoon had gone golden, the sky starting to warm toward evening, and the sounds of the party reached us as a pleasant hum from inside. The world felt very far away and very simple from where we stood. She clasped her hands in front of her, looked at me directly. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one, not a polite one." I waited. I am good at waiting. "I asked Marcus to ask your mother to ask you not to wear your uniform," she said. I'm not going to pretend it was his idea. It was mine, because I was worried about the photographs and the aesthetic and what my family would think and how it would look. She paused. "Those are very small reasons. I know that now. I think I knew it then too. I just told myself they weren't." I looked at her. The golden light sat on her wedding dress and made it glow. "What changed?" I asked. "What happened in that church?" she said. "Those people, the way they stood up for you without being asked, without any coordination, just because it was right." Her voice had something rough in it. I realized I had been so focused on how everything looked that I had completely missed what things meant. What your service means. What your uniform means. What you are. She took a breath. "I was trying to manage you, and that was wrong. You're not something to be managed. You're my husband's sister, and I want to know you. Really know you." It was the most honest thing she had said to me in 4 years. I think it was one of the most honest things she had said to herself. "I love Marcus," I said, "and I want us to be family. Real family. The kind that knows each other." "So do I," she said. And I believed her. We walked back in together. And when Marcus caught my eye from across the room and I gave him the nod, the small, clear, "I'm all right and we're all right" nod, the relief in his face was complete. Late in the reception, after the dinner and the toasts and the first dances, and the moment when the dance floor finally filled with people of all ages, doing their best and their worst with equal enthusiasm, My father found me. He was standing at the edge of it all with a glass of bourbon and the expression of a man who has seen a great many important things in his life and is currently experiencing another one. He put his arm around my shoulders when I came to stand beside him, and we watched the room together without speaking for a while. I should have said something, he told me eventually. When your mother talked to you, I should have been the one to talk to you. And I should have said something very different. You polished my buttons, I said, a small sound that was almost a laugh. That isn't the same thing. No, I agreed. But I understood what it meant. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm proud of you. I've been proud of you every day of your life. I don't say it enough. You say it when it counts, I told him. And I meant it. Some people say it constantly, and you learn to discount it. My father said it rarely and meant it completely. And every time it landed like something solid on the dance floor. Marcus and Vanessa were swaying slowly to a song. I didn't know, but that had the quality of something chosen with care, slow and aching and specific. His chin was on the top of her head. Her eyes were closed. They looked like two people who had found their way to each other across all the things that might have kept them apart and had decided to stay. I watched them and felt no complication in my chest at all. Just gratitude. Pure, simple, entirely uncomplicated gratitude that they had found each other and that I was here to see it. In the weeks after the wedding, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in any single conversation or gesture. Just the slow, ground-level settling that happens after something important has moved. My mother called the week after I returned to base. She asked how I was, how the unit was, whether I was sleeping and eating properly. The same questions she always asked, but something in the texture of the call was different, softer, more honest somehow. In the way of someone who has stopped trying to manage a situation and is simply relating to a person. Before she hung up, she said, I put a new photo on the refrigerator. From the wedding. A pause. You look beautiful in your uniform, Sarah. You always have. I thanked her. I meant it. A month after the wedding, a package arrived at the base. Inside was a framed photograph, 8x10, gold frame, simple and good. Marcus and Vanessa on the church steps in the golden late afternoon light, and I was beside Marcus, and we were all three laughing at something just out of frame. My uniform was in it completely, taking no special effort to be accommodated. It was simply part of the photograph, part of the day, part of the family. It is one of the most beautiful photographs I have ever seen. I keep it on my desk. Every morning I see it. I think about Robert Gallagher often, the 83-year-old in the dark suit who stood first, who saluted, who started the thing that 12 people finished together. I didn't have a way to stay in touch with him. He was a guest of Vanessa's family, there for a wedding, part of someone else's story that briefly, enormously intersected with mine. I think about what that moment cost him. Old knees, an unfamiliar church, a wedding he had come to simply celebrate. No one had asked him to do what he did. No one had arranged it. There was no meeting beforehand, no signal, no coordination. He simply saw what was happening, a woman in uniform, and the quality of the room around her, and what was true, and he stood. And then 11 others saw him stand and stood too. One by one, each making their own choice in their own moment to answer something that didn't need to be said in words. That is what I return to when I think about that day, not the request to hide, not the conversation in the corridor, not even the reconciliation on the terrace, meaningful as that was, not any of the difficult things. I return to 12 people rising, scattered through a congregation without a plan. I return to what that tells me about the world. There is always someone who sees you, even in the rooms where you have been most carefully arranged to be invisible, Even in the moments when the people closest to you are asking you to make yourself smaller, there are strangers in the back pews who have been watching from the beginning, who see you completely, who are simply waiting for the right moment to stand. You only have to be yourself long enough for them to find you. If I could speak to the woman sitting in that childhood bedroom on the third night, not the one who had already decided, but the one who was still sitting with her question still in the dark, still folded over the weight of being asked to erase herself by people she loved, I would tell her this. The people who ask you to be less than yourself are not always cruel. They are sometimes afraid. They are sometimes so fixed on the surface of things that they have genuinely lost the ability to see underneath. And that is a kind of poverty that you should feel pity for rather than bitterness about. They sometimes love you, even the ones who are asking you to shrink, and a love that is real but incomplete. A love that hasn't yet grown large enough to hold all of you. That love can grow, but only if you give it something real to grow toward. If you make yourself small enough to fit their comfort, you teach them that your smallness is the truth of you. You deprive them of the chance to rise. You deprive yourself of the experience of being fully, completely, honestly known. Wear the uniform. Whatever your uniform is, the thing that is most completely, and honestly, you, the thing that represents. Where you have been and what you have earned and what you believe and who. You are in your most uncompromised self. Carry it into every room that matters. Not aggressively, not as a challenge, not to prove something to anyone. Carry it as an offering. This is who I am. I am not hiding it anymore. If you love me, meet me here. If you cannot meet me here, that is information too. Some people will look away. Some will manage and minimize and smooth over. Some will send someone else to deliver a message they don't have the courage to deliver themselves. Some will whisper in corridors about normal and heavy, and time and place. Let them, because some scattered through the crowd, in places you never expected, people you have never met and may never meet again, will stand. And they will stand not for you, specifically, not because they know your name or your story. They will stand because they recognize something, because they have carried something similar and they know what it costs, and they will not let the cost go unacknowledged. And in that standing, you will be seen in the way that truly matters, not the managed, photographable, aesthetically cohesive version of you. All of you. The real version. The one that took years to become and that no one gets to put in a closet because it doesn't fit the color palette. My name is Sarah. I am a captain in the United States Army. I have served for 11 years across deployments I can and cannot name. Alongside people I would follow without hesitation into anything that mattered. At my brother's wedding, my family asked me to hide what I was. And for 2 nights and 3 days, I nearly did. I sat in the dark with my uniform hanging in a closet and felt the pull of smallness, the quiet, seductive comfort of making yourself easier to manage, of shrinking to the size of someone else's picture. I put on the uniform, and 12 veterans rose in a church without a plan, without a signal, without anything but the shared knowledge of what service means and what it costs, to tell me that I was seen, that I was honored, that I was not alone, that no one was going to let my presence in that room pass without being acknowledged fully, completely in the language that mattered. I have been in genuine danger. I have been in rooms where the stakes were irreversible and the margin was nothing. I have been through things that are harder, objectively, than a family conflict at a wedding. And yet those 15 seconds in a sunlit church have stayed with me longer than almost anything else. They have stayed because they taught me something I needed to learn. They taught me that dignity, the real kind, the earned kind, the kind that lives in the bones rather than the performance, cannot be taken from you by people who refuse to honor it. It can only ever be hidden by the person who carries it. When they choose to carry it out of sight, I will not carry mine out of sight again, and I hope, sincerely, from whatever part of me is capable of hoping things for strangers I will never meet, that you won't carry yours out of sight either. Whatever your uniform is, wear it. The people worth knowing will stand.